Hi everybody! My name is Rebecca Waller. I am an MST, that's Multi-Systemic Therapist, at North Range Behavioral Health. The MST team is one of our evidence-based, home-based family therapy options. The service that I provide focuses on both relational and behavioral work with families. Our program is intended to support youth in remaining in the community with family, and we place a high emphasis on empowering caregivers and supporting them in building skills and strategies to interface with their youth and intervene in behavioral issues. As an MST therapist, a portion of my work is also spent supporting families to partner with other agencies like the school, the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and other community resources. I hope the time we spend together today can provide you with some ideas for how you can support your children and your family. So, welcome to Coffee with a Counselor. Let's take a sip. I won't lie to you folks, this is not coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker. This is actually apple cider because it is fall, y'all. It's actually really good. So, my topic for today is systemic parenting. And I think the biggest question that people usually have about systemic parenting is, what is systemic parenting? Which is a really fair question. So, it's always easier to just kind of show this to people first, so I'm just going to show you guys real quick. Systemic parenting is not only taking into account your child, but taking into account all the things that surround your child that are influencing them. So, let me draw real quick. So, here's your kid. Kid's at the center here. I want you to picture all these different systems that surround your kid. So, there's your kid, there's your family, there is their friends or peers, there is the school, then there is maybe extracurricular activities or other community-based activities. And I don't know if that's how you spell extracurricular, but don't fact check me on that. And then this last one here would be the community in general. So like, if you're where North Range is based, that would be like the entire community of Greeley, or the entire Evans community, or something like that. So, the reason that it's called systemic parenting is because all of these things influence each other. So your kid influences the family, and the family influences your kid. Your kid influences their peer group, and their peer group influences them. They influence the way that the school is relating to them, and the school influences the way that they relate to the school. That kind of stuff, right? So, now that you kind of know what systemic parenting is, how do you do it? What does that mean? What does it look like? So, the premise of systemic parenting is that you would be connecting with all these different systems in your kid's life so that you can influence them, kind of know what's going on, be involved in your kid's life. So how would we do that? The first and the biggest part is information. Information is absolutely key. So what I want to walk you guys through is just kind of some examples with what I think is maybe the top 3 systems that I hear a lot of families talk about. So let me erase my whiteboard real quick. So the top 3 systems that I hear families talk about is peers, the school, and then kind of like just general extra So whenever I talk about systemic parenting, a lot of people really understand the school. That makes a lot of sense. It's a system that everybody interfaces with. It's a system that every kid goes to, that kind of thing. So let's start there, because that's some common ground. So, the school. When talking about systemic parenting with the school, communication is key. So proactive is better than reactive, but even reactive, when you're starting to build those bridges in those systems, that's still really helpful. So what are some proactive things you can do? Things like reaching out to teachers, getting to know them, reaching out to administration, getting to know them, introducing yourself, giving some background on your kiddo, providing your contact information so that they can contact you if needed. If your child has an IEP or a 504, being very involved in the IEP or 504 process and that review process. That type of proactive stuff. What would some reactive steps be? So let's say you get a call home from school. It's not the greatest call. Little Johnny might have been acting up. So what are you going to do reactively to kind of build that bridge with the school? Something that you might do is you might request a meeting. A lot of parents don't know that they're allowed to request meetings with schools. That is 100% allowed. It's your kid. So something that you could do is you could request a meeting. You could call to try to set that up. You could email to try to set that up. And in that meeting, come in with a clear agenda. So something that I do with a lot of families is looking at what was the behavior, what led to the behavior, and what can the kid do moving forward differently, and then what can the people around them do differently moving forward. I think this last piece is a step that a lot of people miss. And that's that systemic part, right? Instead of just focusing on the kid, also looking at how the kid is influencing the system, but the system is also influencing the kid. So coming in and just kind of brainstorming. Something that's really helpful with schools is to ask rather than tell. Schools are very, very busy. They do a lot of hard work. Gotta love our teachers. They are such hard workers. Gotta love our administrators, such hard workers. And even when we may feel frustrated by the behavior that our kid is displaying, or we may feel frustrated by the way that people around him are reacting to that behavior, it's always important to come in with that spirit of collaboration. So that's kind of the school piece. Let's look at peers. Something that a lot of parents don't even really consider to be a system around their kids is their peers. And even when they do consider it, they're like, aren't kids just kind of gonna do what they're gonna do? And to a degree, yes, kids are gonna do what they're gonna do. But there's some steps that you can do to kind of just keep an eye on that piece. So the first part, just like the school, information is key. So knowing your kids' friends, having their contact information, knowing your kids' friends' parents and having their contact information, knowing where they live. And there's ways that you can do this that are not necessarily terribly intrusive. Things like driving your kid to the house of their friend, so that way you know where they live. And as you drive them there, before you drop them off, just knock on the door, do some handshaking, collect some contact information, that kind of stuff. Something else that can be proactive and helpful is just setting a norm in your household that if your kid tells you they're going to be somewhere, you're going to check on them. Some people might consider this helicopter parenting. What I would say, the difference between helicopter parenting and systemic parenting is a control piece. Helicopter parenting is unhealthy in that there's an excessive need for control, there's a micromanaging aspect to it, whereas systemic parenting, that trust is an earned piece. So whatever your kid is showing you with their behaviors, the trust that they have earned, that's where you're meeting them. So for example, something that I do with kiddos who are sometimes struggling with negative peers is I create an A, B, and C basket for friends. So with these, it might relate to what type of friend they are and then what level of supervision you need with that friend. So let's say an A peer, they might do well in school, they might have a job, They might be respectful of their parents. They might be making quality choices. Things like that. A B peer. Maybe a B peer is someone who previously made some really tough decisions but is on their way up and they're turning it around. Maybe they are improving their grades. And the opposite is true, you know. Maybe a B peer is an A peer who's going through a tough time. A C peer might be someone who is consistently making some tough decisions or has recently made a pretty big decision that wasn't the greatest. So people can move between these groups based off of their choices, based off their life circumstances, things like that. An A peer, maybe your kiddo would be allowed to hang out with them over at their house or be able to go out and about in the community, not necessarily have a lot of supervision around that, but still checking in with them. So like if they say they're going to the movies, texting them and being like, are you guys at the movies? Can you send me pictures of your ticket stubs? That kind of stuff. A B peer might be someone who maybe they can hang out at their house, but only if their parents will be there and will be able to watch them. And if their parents aren't there and aren't willing to watch them, then maybe it's a thing where they can only come to your house. And maybe you don't watch them the whole time, but you are keeping eyes on to make sure that we're making good choices. And then a C peer, maybe that's someone who they can only really hang out at your house while you are watching them in a common area. And one thing that I really emphasize to parents is that people can move between these groups. So if a C peer, you know, say quits drugs, gets out of a gang, starts getting straight A's, and is on the college track, maybe they move up to an A peer. Maybe an A peer starts making some really poor decisions. Maybe they're sneaking out. Maybe they're encouraging your kid to sneak out. Maybe that A peer becomes a C peer, briefly. It's just about what their choices are in that moment. So the last one that we have is just kind of general extracurriculars. So general extracurriculars are things like general pro-social activities. So things like the church choir, volunteering, the community kickball league, going to the skate park, those types of things. Something that I see a lot of parents do is they notice that their kids really love these activities. They really love going to choir. They really love playing dodgeball in the league. And so when they want to correct kiddos' behaviors, sometimes they'll use these as a privilege or as a consequence. You know, if you don't clean your room, you can't go to dodgeball type thing. Something that I encourage parents not to do is to do that. I encourage them to leave pro-socials alone because it's important for kids to have that positive interaction. It's important for kids to be around positive peers and to do positive things to build up that sense of mastery, to be able to say, I'm really good at dodgeball and I'm surrounded by people who support me for that, rather than I'm really good at sneaking out and I'm surrounded by people who support me for doing that type of thing. Something else about extracurriculars is just connecting with the leader of that extracurricular. So if it's the choir, just go in and introduce yourself to the conductor. If it's the dodgeball league, go in and introduce yourself to the coach. So that way, you know, if there's no problem now, that's perfect. But down the road, if there is some sort of problem, maybe your kid says they're going to kickball, but they're not necessarily going to kickball, where are they going? That coach will know to reach out to you. That coach will have your number and they'll be like, hey, where's little Johnny? That type of thing. So those are some concrete action steps that you can use to increase your systemic parenting. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the bubble of freedom, because the bubble of freedom is the biggest part of systemic parenting. Sorry, that's so good. I just can't resist. So the bubble of freedom, like I talked about earlier, is the difference between systemic parenting and helicopter parenting. Helicopter parenting is continually invasive, is continually micromanaging, is continually developmentally inappropriately involved in a kid's life. And a bubble of freedom is part of systemic parenting. So let's say, you know how we talked about A, B, and C peers? Let's talk about A, B, and C decisions. So let's say A decisions would be going to school consistently, doing some extracurriculars, hanging out with a good crowd. You know, every now and again when you ask them to do their chores, they're like, bah, like teenagers do. But it's still like really normal, really appropriate teenage stuff. Maybe B decisions would be like every now and again they're not where they're supposed to be, or maybe they're hanging around with some so-so peers, that type of stuff. Maybe their grades are starting to slip, but overall they're still doing really well. And then C decisions, maybe that would be something like if they're experimenting with drugs, maybe that's if they are getting involved with a highly negative peer group, maybe they're sneaking out, those types of things. So depending on whether your kid is making A, B, or C decisions is where that bubble goes. So if your kid is making A decisions, all you need to do is do those proactive steps where you're reaching out to friends' parents, where you're reaching out to the school, and you're just saying, hey, here's my contact information, here's my face, it's lovely to meet you guys, let me know if there's ever an issue. If they're, and checking up with your kid when they are where they are. So we're just establishing that norm. If you say you're going to the movies, mom's going to check that you're going to the movies. If you say you're going to Sarah's house, dad's going to call and see if you're at Sarah's house. That type stuff. Maybe if they're making B decisions, we increase that monitoring and supervision a little bit more. Maybe we are more cautious about who they're hanging out with. Maybe we're checking in more about where they are. Maybe we are kind of keeping tabs on them more, and maybe we're doing some more proactive steps, like reaching out to the school and saying, hey, could you let me know if there's any missing assignments? Hey, could you let me know if there's any sort of behavior issues so that we can address those here at home and I can partner with you? C decisions is where you really bring that bubble of freedom in, and this is meant to be temporary until they can earn back out into that bigger bubble when they're making better decisions. So the C bubble would be doing things that are both proactive and reactive, reaching out to people, saying hello, knowing where your kid is, maybe driving them to all those places to make sure that they get where they're going, or accompanying them on the bus, or having them text you when they get there. There's lots of options to know that they are where they're supposed to be, and really just checking in and having a continual conversation with the adults that surround them so that you can partner with them to help make sure that your kiddo is where they are and that we can kind of put them on the track to make more B and A decisions. Does that make sense? So, bubble of freedom, expanding and contracting with your kiddo's choices, which is what makes it different from helicopter parenting, proactive and reactive ways to interact with the people that surround you and the systems that surround your kid. The systems are your kid, the family, their peers, the school, extracurriculars and pro-socials, other systems, and the community at large. And with that in mind, that's a pretty brief synopsis of systemic parenting. So thanks for tuning in on behalf of myself, the MST team, and the North Range Behavioral Health. Next week, my coworker Eric Woolsey will provide information related to communicating with your teen. So if someone you know is experiencing a behavioral health emergency, please call our crisis line at 970-347-2120 or walk into the Crisis Center, which is at 928 12th Street in Greeley, or you can text TALK, T-A-L-K, to 38255. You can also call our Colorado Spirit COVID-19 warm line at 970-347-2359 if you just need to talk. All right, folks, I hope you have a lovely morning.